The United States just lifted the tariffs on electronics, anything from smartphones to computers to tablets, and it seems like there was so much pressure on US consumers that the current administration had to surrender to China and lift all of these tariffs. People rushed to the Apple store to buy the latest iPhone before the price hikes to over $2,000. Even Apple itself literally flew cargo planes from China to the United States to avoid the tariffs. So what exactly is happening over here? Why did Donald Trump reverse the tariff plan? Wasn't this supposed to be the liberation day where the United States is going to generate so much money from the tariffs in order to cancel the income tax in the United States? What exactly went wrong? Did China just win this trade war against China? Did the United States become a joke worldwide? Let's figure out what exactly is happening and how all of this is putting the US dollar is in danger. Give this video a thumbs up and let's get right into it. The dollar is clearly in danger, and you can clearly see that in the graph that I have right in front of me. This is the yield curve. When you're allocating capital, you need to plan long term because you're allocating trillions of dollars, sometimes tens of trillions of dollars. And some of the best or the safest investments that has ever existed in history were the treasury bills that are being produced by the United States. Buying treasury bills literally means that you're loaning your money to the US government because that's what it basically means. And because the US economy is the world's most powerful economy, you're not worried to make your money back because the government can always tax the US citizens, which means that whenever there is uncertainty and there is a crisis, investors always sell their other investments such as stock investments, crypto investments, real estate investments, and instantly start buying US government bonds. And government yields have an inverse relationship to the prices of the bonds. When there is so much demand for US government bonds, their prices start to rise. If a demand for anything in the economy rises, their prices suddenly rise. So it works the exact same way with government bonds. On the other side, yields on those bonds start to go down because the US government has to pay interest for people who are loaning their money to the US government. And if suddenly everybody wants to loan you money, then you can actually offer them a much lower interest rate in order to borrow their money. And that's why whenever there is crisis and uncertainty and everybody starts buying US treasury bills, their yields suddenly go down. But if you look at what has been happening recently, the yields on the US government bonds have been increasing dramatically from about 4% to almost 5%, probably 4.5%. And this is the opposite of what has been happening. And that led a lot of people to worry about the state of the dollar. This chart basically means that investors no longer look at the US dollar as the safest investments out there, and they are looking at other investments such as gold. And that's why if you look at gold prices are rising dramatically. Investors are even investing in the stock market instead of US treasury bills. So this curve clearly illustrates that a lot of investors are losing faith in the US government bonds. And the only reason that they would lose their faith in American treasury bills is when they start losing their faith in the American economy and they expect that the American economy is going to go down over time. And it's very understandable because there is so much uncertainty about the state of the US economy. One day we have tariffs of 150%, then the next day these tariffs are being replaced or reversed. One day we have tariffs on 150 countries, the next day there is a pause of 90 days on all of these tariffs. One day we have a plan to replace the income tax with tariffs, the other day we're canceling these tariffs. And that leads a lot of investors not to know what exactly to expect out of the US economy. And that's why when they're sitting on so much cash, they don't know how to invest it because they don't know the rules of the game. And if you want to understand what exactly Trump is trying to do, all you have to do is to dig into his mind. And I know that it's very difficult. How can you possibly get into the head of another person? But you have to understand that Trump has been in business for many, many years. And he has written multiple books that explains how exactly he thinks and what exactly he plans to do. So there's a book called The Art of the Deal that you probably heard about it. And he used the strategy of the art of the deal to sign any deals within his businesses. And right now, he's simply using the strategy of the art of the deal for the entire US economy. And what I'm about to say might seem like I'm trying to defend Trump, but in reality, all I'm doing is that I'm going to take the art of the deal and his lessons from the art of the deal that he has implemented in his businesses over the entire of his career, and I will try to explain what exactly is happening right now according to the art of the deal. And finally, it will start to make sense what exactly Trump is doing and why it's causing so much chaos. Trump is going to change the entire global world order during his entire presidency, and we will live in an entirely new environment. So let me explain what exactly is happening. So the first lesson from the art of the deal is that aim as high as you possibly can. So you're not going to ask for a fair deal. You are going to ask for maximum amount of leverage that you can possibly get out of your opponent. So if you're dealing with China, we're not going to ask for a fair deal. We're going to ask for maximum that you can possibly can. So we're going to go to China and we are going to ask for everything. We're going to go to Taiwan and we're going to ask for everything. If we are negotiating with the tech companies such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, we are going to ask for everything. The second part of that plan is that know your market. And that basically means that you should know what exactly you're negotiating with. If you don't have anything in your pocket, if your product isn't really as great as it's supposed to be, if you don't have any kind of leverage over your opponent, then you cannot possibly negotiate with anybody. Imagine you're in a business meeting negotiating some kind of a deal and you have nothing to offer. Can you negotiate a good deal? Well, absolutely not. But if you know that you have the best product in the market and everybody wants that product, and the better you know that and the better you know your opponent's products and you know that your product is better than your opponent's, the better you can actually negotiate. And Donald Trump perfectly understands that. The US consumer market is the world's most powerful and the best market. The third part of that plan is that maximize leverage. So you are going to ask for as much as possible, and then if you're not going to get all of that, or at least you will get half of that, then you've actually got a far better deal. So if we are negotiating and I will ask for 100%, but at the end of the day I will simply get 70%, is that a good deal? Well, absolutely, that's a great deal. Imagine I had 0 and I asked for 100 and I got 70, so that's the kind of a deal that you make. But if you go into the negotiation and you ask for 30 and you end up getting 15, for example, then that's a bad deal. And finally, control the narrative. You want to seem like you're the good guy. You want to seem like you're doing the right thing. And that's why if you watch how Trump has been actually playing this entire game, first of all, he's been trying to make an argument that the tariffs are going to replace the income tax. So you're actually doing a very noble, great thing. You're trying to cancel the income tax. Secondly, you are shouting as loudly as possible that China is ripping us off. You're shouting that they're taking advantage out of that. You're shouting that everybody is trying to take advantage out of us. You're even trying to make a claim that the entire point of the European Union was formed in order to destroy the United States. So you are trying to make it to the American voters that you're actually on the good side of the history and you're doing the noble and the great thing for American people. So you're controlling the narrative. And that's why every single day you see all of these tweets that come from President Trump that they're winning, that the United States is winning, that other countries stop ripping off the United States, and so on and so forth. And now let's take these lessons and try to apply them to what Trump is doing right now. I'm going to give you an example of United States and China, but this is the exact same strategy that the US is actually using against all other countries. In fact, the US is also using this strategy against US companies. Like US companies such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all of them, or even Nike, have shifted their manufacturing outside the United States. So if we want to bring them, we have to use the exact same strategy against them as well. So we're using the full force of the American economy against everyone else in order to sign a better deal for the United States. Now, this is not my plan. This is not what I'm advocating for. I'm simply explaining to you the rationale behind Trump's strategy and his plan. Because a lot of people are throwing these words that Trump does not have a strategy, Trump does not have a plan. And it might seem like that in the middle of this chaos and changing the rules and changing the policies every single day. But if you literally dig down into his strategy, but if you dig down into his books, into how he's been doing business for the entire course of his life, you will know what exactly he's doing. And yes, Trump had failures in his life, which is absolutely normal in any person's life, but he also had a lot of successes in his entire life. So he has an idea of how to make deals. So this is the United States. On the other side, we have China. So let's assume that the current deal that the United States and China has is 70-30, that is in favor of China, which is absolutely normal because over the last 50 to 60 years, if you go back, for example, to 1980s and 90s, you had a very, very rich country called China. Now you have a very rich country that is called the United States, and then you have a very poor country that is called China. Like the average Chinese was so insanely poor compared to the average American that it made no sense in order to sign a deal that is 50-50. This deal would be inherently bad for China because China is so far behind the United States. So the deal that was signed that was a bit favorable to China instead of the United States in order to encourage China to deal with the United States. If they wouldn't sign this kind of a deal, China would have never opened up to the rest of the world. So the first deal that was signed was 70-30 in favor of China. Now, let's say that our goal, for example, is to sign a deal that is fair to both of them, that is 50-50. Now, if we are going to get into the negotiation table right now where the deal is 70-30, maximum what the United States might actually be able to get is probably, let's say, 60-40 that is in favor in China yet again. But that's not the kind of a deal that Trump wants to sign. What Trump wants to do into this negotiation is that we are going to get into them and we're going to get maximum what we want. We're going to ask for almost everything. Let's say 90 out of 100. So that's exactly what we claim that we want out of China. So we are going to put a tariffs of 150% so that when we are sitting in a negotiation table with the Chinese counterparts, we're going to say, all right, we are willing to lower the tariffs from 150% to 100% if you lower your tariffs from 120%, let's say, to 50%, and so on and so forth, so that we have something to give up in order something to get. That's how negotiation works. You have to give something before you actually get something. So if you start the negotiation and you have imposed a 200% tariffs on China while they have imposed a much lower tariffs on you, then you're giving up something in order to get something. So if you lower down, for example, tariffs by 10% and you get something out of it, you lower down tariffs by another 10% and you get something out of it. And that's basically the strategy in very, very simple words. Another problem that the United States has with China is that it's not just about China. It's also about the US companies. What China basically imports to the United States, if you look at the chart, it's mostly electronics, laptops, batteries, and toys. And most of what is being imported from China isn't being built by Chinese. It is being built by American companies in China, and then they are being imported to the United States. Most of the smartphones, for example, are being manufactured by Apple in China and then brought to the United States. So they are considered imports from China. Intel, for example, manufactured their chips in China and then bring them to the United States. Nike builds or manufactures their shoes in China and then brings them to the United States. So we want to not only negotiate with China, but we also want to negotiate with Apple. We want to negotiate with Microsoft. We want to negotiate with Nike. And that's why Trump comes out and he announces a tariff of 150%. Now, Apple panics and they start shipping their iPhones from the rest of the world from China into the United States in order to avoid the tariffs. What usually these corporations do is that they're working in the favor or in the interest of their shareholders. So they will try to play around with the rules in order to make sure that they will simply wait until the president's term is over and they will simply go back to the business. And Trump perfectly understands that. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to raise the tariffs to 150% so that Apple knows that we are not kidding. This is not a joke. Unless you bring back manufacturing to the United States, we're going to keep those tariffs to 150%. The next day, Trump lowers down the tariffs or gives an exemptions to smartphones. But that sends a message to Apple that we are giving you time to bring that manufacturing back to the United States. And if you don't do that, just like we did it the first time and we increased the tariffs to 150%, we can increase it yet again. And Apple doesn't know whether Trump is going to raise the tariffs tomorrow or maybe next week or maybe next month. And that's why Apple has to bring manufacturing in some way back to the United States as soon as possible. So if Apple tomorrow starts making progress on bringing manufacturing back to the United States, then Trump will keep the exemption on the smartphones. But if next week or next month, for example, Apple will not be actually doing any kind of progress in order to bring manufacturing back to the United States, Trump can announce again, we are raising the tariffs and there is no more exemption on Apple and the smartphones or any kind of electronics. And that gives incentives to those American companies in order to bring manufacturing back to the United States. So you're not simply negotiating with China. Yes, China can raise the tariffs on US goods, but you also want to push American companies to bring manufacturing back to the United States. So from now onwards, Nike knows, Apple knows, Microsoft knows, Qualcomm knows, AMD knows that the rules can change tomorrow. So while we have the exemption today, let's bring those manufacturing back to the United States so that when Trump announces the tariffs again or stops the exemptions, we are not going to be influenced and we are not going to be impacted by those high tariffs. Yes, Apple is not going to simply bring all of that manufacturing back to the United States, or Nike is not going to produce their shoes in the United States. Yes, China is not going to agree to everything that we're asking. But if we get into that negotiation and we're going to sign a deal that is somewhere here, let's say it is 60-40, but in the favor of the United States, or maybe it is 70-30 in the favor of the United States. This is going to be a far better deal than the deal that the United States has right now with China, which is 70-30. The same would apply to the US companies. Yes, Apple is not going to bring all manufacturing back to the United States, but they will bring as much as it's possible. Nike will not bring everything back to the US, but they will bring as much as possible. Qualcomm, Microsoft, and the list goes on and on. Secondly, we also want from China to open their markets to the US companies, and that means that there are no more restrictions for the US companies. So Apple is going to go and sell in the Chinese market as much as they can, and there are not going to be subsidies from the Chinese Communist Party into the Chinese companies to fight Apple. And why is Trump so confident that he can win this trade war? And that's because access to the US market is the best thing that any company can possibly wish. The Chinese market is not as big as the US market. The European market is not as big as the US market. And that's why Trump can take this into the negotiations. And because everybody wants access to the US market, he can sign far better deals for the United States than any other country. And that's why you as an investor, if you're looking at all of this volatility in the market, you have to be confident because this is the plan that Trump has actually announced since the beginning. This is his strategy. He is going to sign a deal at the end of the day that is going to be favorable to the United States. Yes, this deal might actually take some time, but that deal includes that a lot of business is going to come back to the United States, and that will grow the US GDP. Yes, there is going to be some period of volatility, but this is exactly why Trump one day announces the tariffs, the second day he is not announcing the tariffs, the third day he is actually making an exemption. Maybe a few weeks from now or a couple of days from now, Trump will say no more exemptions for smartphones because Apple is actually not doing any kind of real progress to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Sooner or later, China will come to the United States and they will try to sign a deal that is fair to the United States, or maybe even a bit favorable to the United States, because China wants the US consumer market to keep growing their own economy. So as a long-term investor, if you have actually positioned yourself perfectly, you are going to see some of your stocks going down during this turmoil, but overall you have to be confident that if you have actually invested in the right stocks, your stocks are going to shoot to the roof when this entire deal is going to be over, and they will come to an agreement that is favorable to the United States. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.